your e-certificate of participation. Visit certificate.vibalgroup.com to generate your proof of attendance. Place your questions on the comment box allotted during the session and they will be addressed by our speaker later on. Share the video using hashtag LearnAs1PH as our official hashtag to our Vibal webinars. Experience learning, ka-Vibal? And now, to proceed with our webinar this afternoon, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished speaker today. John Michael de la Paz, or Teacher Mike to his students, graduated with a degree in elementary education, teaching in the early grades from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, magna cum laude. He then finished his MA in Comparative Literature, focusing on Philippine children's literature from the College of Art and Letters in the same university. As a former faculty of the UP College of Education, UPIS, he has taught at the kinder, elementary, secondary, undergraduate, and graduate levels. After deciding to leave and learn outside the university, he took the board licensure exam for teachers in March of 2018 and ranked first. For the past 9 years, he has been training teachers around the country with different organizations, most of which are projects with the Department of Education on reading and literacy, storytelling, gender equality education, and children's literature. Current, he is a teacher and assistant director of CHMCDC. Like most of you, he is still finishing his modules for his elementary students and is not trying not to panic. He loves chocolate chip cookies, spaghetti, and sports. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Mr. John Michael de la Paz.
Hi. Hello. Thank you so much for the introduction. Good afternoon to everybody watching in this YouTube video. I'm happy to be here again. This is my third with Vibal, and I'm thankful that they got me again. And hopefully, I can share with you ideas on our topic for today. So yan, magandang hapon. And yes, 5 linggo na kami nagtuturo sa online. So galing rin akong turo. So sa mga nagpe-prepare pa lang, I wish you all the best. And hopefully, the things you will learn from this topic or this talk will help you in the coming school year. So let me just pull out my slide. There you go. So again, good afternoon, everybody. Our topic for today is creating diagnostic assessment tools for listening capacity. Now, it sounds highfalutin, it sounds complicated. Well, it is in fact complicated. But in 1 hour, you really can't create a standardized test for listening capacity. So my focus is on informal criterion reference assessment for early grades to high school. And since I only have 1 hour, I shall be discussing key points on how you can create your own assessment. I just want to remind everybody, of course, that there are reading specialists. There are experts on learning abilities and learning disabilities and learning struggles and challenges. And for those children who are struggling with reading, we might need those experts, right? But that doesn't mean that as a classroom teacher, and someone teaching inside the classroom, inside the school, it doesn't mean that you cannot create your own assessment. In fact, you know exactly what's happening inside your classroom. So it is really you who's the best one to see or to notice the difficulties your children are experiencing, particularly in reading. For this afternoon, we shall be focusing on listening capacity. So I just want to start by introducing myself. Yeah. Nag-celebrate kami ng Buwan ng Wika recently and I did a storytelling. So that explains that picture. So my name is John Michael de la Paz, Teacher Mike. That's what my students call me. I'm a reading and classroom teacher. So forget about all the things that you heard earlier. But what's most important is that I am a reading teacher and a classroom teacher. I'm not a reading specialist, okay? Meaning my topic will be focusing on research, but also on my experiences as a teacher of reading and literacy. And as a classroom teacher, kayo rin nga, katulad ng sinabi ko, kaya nyo rin gumawa ng assessment at dapat kayong gumawa ng assessment specifically for listening capacity. So our topic this afternoon, I divided it into 3 parts. I just want to review, understand, and diagnose. So for review, we shall be just going through some terms and concepts in literacy and assessment that is very important when we talk about the topic at hand. At the same time, we shall understand the relationship of reading and listening because a lot of teachers, maybe not everybody, but a lot, not just teachers, lalo na yung parents natin who are also helping out with the learning the school year, we tend to think that reading and listening are really similar and thus they just share the same skills and the same way of assessment. So we don't really think about that difference and we want to flesh that out. What are the key differences and what is the actual connection of reading and listening? And lastly, diagnose. This is where I will give you pointers or tips on how to create your informal criterion reference listening diagnostic assessment that will inform your practice as a teacher. So hopefully this afternoon, you'll get a lot from this topic. So there. So let's first review terms and concepts in literacy and assessment. So don't worry, wala naman tong quiz after, but it will be really nice to review some of these. So listening, when you talk about listening, it's basically the ability to understand what is heard. And like the other macro skills, it's also a process. So it starts with hearing sounds, and this starts at the at the youngest early age possible where learners, not just learners, not kids, before going to school, they know and they hear sounds and they're able to discriminate those sounds. Because if they can't, if they're having problems and difficulties with hearing sounds, then they won't be able to process what it is they are hearing. And when they process that, understanding hopefully ensues. So it's a process. Listening is a process. So when we talk about listening capacity, we're using listening capacity in the context of reading and teaching reading. If you take it literally, it simply says that it's how you listen, right? Or your ability to listen. But for today, listening capacity is the capacity to understand through listening with reading taken out of the equation. So that's very important, as you'll find out in a bit. An example of this is read aloud. When somebody's listening to a read aloud, we take out the reading or the decoding part of it. So it's really focusing on that capacity of listening. Also, listening comprehension level is another term for listening capacity. Most of the time, this is quantitative, especially if you're using a standardized test. But for this afternoon, we will be looking at some quantities or numbers, but it's more of qualitative. Okay. But again, listening comprehension level or listening capacity can be both measured using quantitative and qualitative means. Also, listening capacity can be if you need one. Okay. So I know, again, reading, I just want to reiterate, reading is a very technical field. Okay, that's why as teachers, as classroom teachers, we should be at least aware of the basics. So I will not be discussing in detail the nitty-gritty or very technical terms on assessment, but I will be focusing, like as I previously said, on assessment that is criteria reference. Okay. But nonetheless, diagnostic assessment, or comprehensive phonological awareness, such as phonic skills, listening comprehension, the results should inform instruction and intervention. Diagnostic assessment kung hindi mo naman gagawin sa iyong pagtuturo o sa iyong practice. So diagnostic assessment should inform your instruction and your intervention. Now, diagnostic assessment can come in two forms. It can be a norm referenced kind, or it can be your criterion referenced. I know most of us have graduated from EdUc schools, right? So we should already know this. So when we say norm reference, it's formal. It's always formal. It has to be compared to a defined population. It's typically administered once a year, and it can be quite expensive because most of this need a subscription or an individualized set of test materials. So it's a bit pricier. But there, I think, well, I'm not sure if any free yung formal na administered standardized test. I'm not sure if any free yung formal na administered standardized test. But most of these are really expensive. So sample are the GORT or the Gray Oral Reading Test, and PAT2 or the Phonological Awareness Test 2. For criterion reference, take note that it can be both formal and informal. Okay, now, the thing with formal and informal in assessment, some teachers think that when it's informal, it's less, it's less serious or it's less credible. Informal assessment can still help you in your teaching, and it will help you if you know how to do it properly. Okay? So kaya lang siya sinasabi na formal and informal because formal has more detailed data, has more basis, has a stronger foundation on that test, right? But for things like, your quizzes or informal tests, informal criteria reference papers, right? Katulad na lang rin ng, when you have activities, those can also fall under informal. Okay? It doesn't mean it's the word informal to it. Okay? It just means it's not as highly standardized as your other tests. So when we focus on criterion reference, it means we're comparing the student skills to a defined set of skills or goals. So kanina kasi in norm reference, we're comparing them to a population. In criterion reference, our goal is to compare that to a defined set of skills or goals. So this can be informed by your curriculum, the standards your school has set or the Department of Education has set, such as competencies and whatnot. It can also be done multiple times in a year. So this is really more formative, right? Hindi katulad ng norm reference, you can't administer that more than once or at least more than twice because it can be very difficult and it's really taxing. So part of that norm reference is the data processing of that will really include a lot of analysis. So pag criterion reference, it will be done multiple times in a year and pwede siyang gawin talaga in your classrooms or even at home. So examples, you can have your pre-test post-test and an example is the PhilErie or the Philippine Informal Reading Inventory that the Department of Education has graciously developed for all the Filipino children. So you can look into that. Okay. So ito example ng Phonological Awareness Test 2. This is a standardized test. So sample ng mga itatest nila dyan, rhyming and discrimination and production, sentences, syllables and phonemes, and isolation. So these are the ones I highlighted. Rhyming, segmentation, isolation, dapat na-identify nila what's the initial, final, and middle sound. You also have deletion, when you are able to manipulate root word syllables and phonemes. Substitution with manipulatives, blending, syllables and phonemes, phoneme graphing correspondence, phonemic decoding. Again, these are all detailed test questions as part of the Phonological Awareness Test 2. Now you know the standardized test, you can draw out some of the things that they are testing and create a simpler one because we can't always afford or we don't have easy access to standardized tests, right? So you can create your own. You just have to pretend and assume that it's going to be standardized test goes through a lot of process or through a long process for it to be standardized. So I'm just giving you an idea what a standardized test might be testing. So this is an example of a reading inventory from the scasd.org. It's in America. So it's reference, so it has a standard. So it's norm reference as well. So kino-compare yan sa Lexile mo. But Lexile is another topic that a reading specialist would be better to talk to you about it. Okay. The ones here on the right side, meron tayo. Sige, let me just annotate that for you. So this one, these are the kinds of text na binabasa nila. So it's a series of passages that they have to read. This is a reading comprehension as a type of text again. And it gives you data. So in this case, the child's Lexile score is going up, which is supposed to be the case for each kid in our classrooms. Okay. So let me just end that one. Yeah. So going back. Now, like what I said, diagnostic assessment can take two forms here, norm reference or criterion reference. But for today, we shall be focusing on the criterion reference, particularly of informal assessment. So this can include closed procedures, story retellings, or running records, katulad ng mga anecdotes ninyo about their students' listening or reading capacity. And then you have your informal reading inventories, or the EREs, right? So that's that. I'm not talking to anyone in particular, but if you have questions for that, you can put it there in the chat box of YouTube. And comes through reading and listening. They think that reading and listening are just very similar, and that if you can listen, then it means you also are reading. Actually, obviously, it's not, kasi nga, it has a different name. It also has a different way of assessing it, and also there are a lot of different things that are particular or specific to each one. So you have your listening, you have your separate language learning. Now, if you in our experts from the Department of Education, yeah. So we have your oral language. So I'm just telling you K to 12 continuum. So alphabet knowledge, and meron to 3 phonics and word recognition, fluency until 7 to 10 yan. Spelling, you have K to 3 until 4 to 6. I mean, obviously it's still until grade 12, and then you have vocab development. Yeah, we talked about that in a previous Vibal talk. And then you have reading comprehension. And lastly, you have your listening. Sorry, not last. Number 12 is listen words. And in a classroom setup, vocabulary, you don't do it as a worksheet. Most of the time, it's a whole group discussion. Diba? So, ano nangyayari, yung pag-unlock natin ng word of sorts. Okay, so yun. So, pwede mo silang masanay while doing that. Okay? Sometimes, you can give a sentence within that sentence without having to read anything. And then you can ask them to define a word, right? Or a part of that sentence, or a word that is in that sentence. Okay. Now you can also check your background knowledge. Okay, background knowledge meaning what do they already know? In schema theory, diba, we want to connect ideas. For learning to occur, it's effective that your students already know. So in listening skills, it can also tell you what a test on listening skills can also tell you what they already know. Okay. Now, sentence or particularly the syntactic comprehension, dito na pumapasok yung how they understand sentences, right? So it's very important that they know that there's a subject and a predicate, right? And what do these things do? That, there's a verb in a sentence, there's a describing word in it, there's a naming word to it. So they would have to understand what that means. Okay? And syempre, yung pragmatic use of language, meaning how you use it in social context. Reasoning is occurring in that listening test, and then finding evidence. If you notice, these are all similar to what you have in reading comprehension, diba?